Hey there, welcome to my study. Here at Sunny Slope, for the first about 6 months of 2025, we're going to be looking at the book of Psalms. And we're calling this series The Poetry of the Gospel because, number one, as many scholars have noted, the whole essence of the gospel is really contained in the Psalms. In other words, the Psalms can help us understand God's work of salvation and rescue and why we need that and how we live that out and so on. But the other part of this is that the gospel pardon me, the book of Psalms is poetry. And poetry actually speaks to us in a way that other genres of writing are less effective at. And so poetry is powerful in the sense that it resonates with us on a heart level. And so we're going to be looking at different aspects of um, how and why God created us. What is our fundamental human problem? How does God resolve that problem? What does it mean to live that out? Now, where we're going to start with this is in Psalm chapter 1, because Psalm 1 really functions as an introduction to the entire book of the Psalms. And so it makes sense for us to start there because Psalm 1 introduces the whole theme of what the Psalms are about. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this in front of you. I'm going to share my screen here. And usually the place where we would start in in any kind of good Bible study, the place where you have to start just by reading the psalm or the text through a couple of times, usually at least once, maybe twice. And you're really at that point, you're not studying it so much as you're actually trying to just listen to it. You want to hear how does this text the first read through, what stands out to you, what do you hear as the emphasis and the main point? What questions do you have? What doesn't make sense? And you'll tuck those questions and those thoughts away in your mind. The second thing that you'll do is what we're going to do here is you start to break the text down, and you want to watch for common or you want to look for the way that the phrases are laid out, and then you want to sort of break the whole text down into just a series of phrases. And that's going to help us later on because it will help us to see how each phrase relates to the phrases around it. Now, poetry, one of the things you have to remember about poetry is that poetry follows a couple of rules. One of them, at least, especially Hebrew poetry, follows a lot of parallelism. And that means that you're going to get phrases that kind of all pile up together and they all really say, they're all kind of related together. They're meant to be read together and they sort of build on one another. Sometimes you get phrases that where the first part will say one thing and then the second will contradict it. Sometimes you get a series of phrases where the first line will say one thing and then the second line expands on that. And then sometimes even a third line expands on it again. That's big in Hebrew poetry, and we have to pay attention to that. There's a couple of other things as well that always stand out. One of them being imagery. Poetic language is really good at painting a picture for our minds to see and then making us wonder about the meaning of that. So, with all that, that's just a couple introductory things. Let's jump in. Here we go. We've got Psalm 1 in front of us. Blessed is the man who walks. And then here's where I said we get poetry, who walks not in the counsel of the wicked. Now, what I'm seeing here, so blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the way of in the seat of scoffers. So you got three things here: wicked, sinners, and scoffers. And then you've got walking, standing, and sitting. So three kind of things. And I kind of want to see if I can get those to line up just because I know that at least, and then I want to get, this phrase here, in the way, in the seat. So I kind of want to see if I can make that line up as much as I can. Make that move over a little bit. So I've got walk, stand, sit, in the counsel, in the way, and in the seat. And then wicked, sinners, and scoffers. Oops, lost a little bit of my, I'm working without a proper mouse today, so I'm finding it um, just a little more difficult than normal. Anyways, there we go. So there you can kind of see again, there's that idea of parallelism. Blessed is the man. Well, what man? The one who walks. And then rather than telling us how positively the person walks, it's the negative things that sets apart the negative things. Counsel, way, seat, sitting, standing, of wicked sinners and scoffers. And then we get a contrastive phrase, but, and that's important because obviously it's not enough just to know how not to walk. And actually, properly, you want this to go by the not and the nor. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law, so we're going to put the word law there together again. And on his law, God's law, he meditates day and night. And there's, of course, we say that in English all the time, night and day. That's um, in a way that's really just a way of talking about totality, right? If you say, well, yeah, he's always on his phone day and night, you mean that someone is nonstop on their phone. Doesn't, so same poetic usage there. He is like a tree. Here's the imagery that we get into. So you're starting to think, well, what do you mean he's like a tree? Well, he's a tree planted by streams of water. What about that tree? Well, it's planted, yields its fruit, and then we get a second line that builds on that. Its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. So we're gonna say he does and he prospers are going to be on separate lines because again, you see the kind of the connection there. What he does, he prospers. Now we're back to the wicked, and already I'm beginning to notice kind of jumping back and forth between wicked and righteous. So we start here with wicked, then we go to righteous. Now we're back to wicked, but are like, and that's, I'm not quite sure what to do with that yet. There might be a bigger poetic form there that we haven't paid attention to or haven't identified yet, but we're just going to at least notice that. When you jump back and forth, sometimes that's an indication of something called a chiasm or an inclusio or something else, which I'll explain a little later. The wicked are not so, and the word not and but always go together. Not but are like chaff. So we actually are contrasting now. We're still with that imagery of tree, but now we have kind of what like the opposite of the tree is the chaff that the wind drives away. And therefore the wicked will not stand. Hey, there's that word stand again. We started with that, standing in the way of sinners. So the righteous man doesn't stand in the way of sinners, but ironically, the wicked won't stand in judgment. That must mean something. We maybe don't know fully yet what that is, but we're going to take note of that. Nor sinners in the congregation. Ah, okay. Um, we're gonna, yeah, kind of hard to keep these apart, but I notice wicked and sinners, and then we have, yeah, wicked and sinners again. So that must mean something. That's intentional, I'm thinking. I don't quite know yet what that is, but we're gonna at least pay attention to that. Nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous, for, and that's a sort of a concluding type um sentence. It sort of indicates purpose or maybe result. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but we're running out of room here. But the way of the wicked, we're gonna contrast that because we see two different ways again. The way of the wicked will perish. So here's where you see parallelism that's going to make you think. So the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. So what's missing in the second phrase is that the Lord, the idea of the Lord knowing the wicked. And again, we're not quite sure exactly how to flesh that out, but it seems like maybe um, the Lord, if the Lord knows the way of the righteous, to perish means that the way the Lord no longer knows of the wicked, or something like that, because that's what's missing in that second phrase. Now, again, we're just kind of reading through with some initial thoughts and responses here. We're not married to our conclusions just yet. I'll stop my share here. But we're trying to get a basic sense of some of the overall themes and ideas of a text like that. Next step, we're going to dig deeper into this passage. And as I've always said, the next step is my favorite. It's where we actually really get to explore the meaning of words and language and the relationship between them. That's really the heart of what good Bible study is all about. So we'll see you in the next step. Welcome back. We are about ready to jump into the next part of Bible study, of studying our text. We are looking at Psalm 1, and the first part of our study involved breaking down the text into as many little phrases as possible and kind of trying to look at the different relationships between all of the different phrases. So we've done that. I'm going to pull that and put that on the screen so that we can have that in front of us. What we're going to do next is, in some ways, is my favorite part of of studying a text. What we're really looking to do is to identify different words. We're looking to identify poetic language. We're looking to identify really what is the message, what was the message of this text for those who would have been the very first people to hear it. So here we go. I'm going to start with this word here, blessed. This is actually a word. There's a couple of different words that a person could have used, but this is a word. It's actually often translated as happy, and that's important because obviously we're looking at Psalm 1. Psalm 1 is the very first psalm in the entire Psalter, and so what the way that this psalm functions is it's an introduction to the really to what the whole book is about, and so you even from the very first word, we might come to we begin to see that the book is about what does it mean to really experience the blessed life? What does it mean to have a life that is blessed and that is happy? And so this psalm starts us off with that. Now, the interesting thing to me is that rather than tell us positively what blessing looks like, it actually starts by telling us negatively. So it says, "Blessed is the man who walks." Okay, so far so good, but then it gets into these negatives. In fact, let's just highlight them here because he actually highlights three of them: not, nar, and nor. And this actually is what is called parallelism. Hebrew, yeah, one of the things that you'll notice in poetry, especially in the Psalms, is this uh the parallelism between one phrase and the next. And so parallelism is always a way of saying really one thing followed by a related idea. Now, sometimes the parallelism is what we call it's like staircase parallelism, where it sort of takes an idea and then builds on it. Sometimes it's what we call antithetical parallelism, which is it gives you one idea and then it follows it by the opposite. There's a couple of other different kinds, but that just Hebrew poetry is really big on that. So you're always looking for these parallel phrases. So we find one right here because we start off walking, and now that's positive, that's related to the blessed one, but then um, we find that they're not in the counsel of the wicked, but then we find here standing and sitting. And so there's this kind of progression. The one who walks not here, nor standing, nor sitting. And so there's kind of this, yeah, we kind of see this idea that's beginning to develop now. And so we'll certainly be um, paying attention to that now because it's telling. Hey there, welcome back. We are about ready to jump into the second part of our study of Psalm 1. First part we took the text and we laid it all out. We kind of pulled it apart into all of the different phrases and we tried to illustrate on the page how each of those different phrases all relate to each other. Now we're about to go a little bit deeper. We're about to flesh this out a little bit more. So I'm going to put my screen back up. That'll allow you to kind of see the work we've done so far. Um, so it's right here. And we start off with the word blessed. Now, I happen to know that this is a translation of a Hebrew word. It's often translated or and could be translated as the word happy. And the reason I draw your attention to that, and this is something that it's a little harder to notice just from reading it through, but with a little extra background knowledge, you know this. The word happy is it's the same word Jesus uses in the Beatitudes, when he talks about blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek and the lowly, and so on. Same word, but the idea here is um there's different words that you can translate for blessing. The meaning here comes closer to the idea of being happy. And the reason I think that's important is because this Psalm 1 is obviously the first psalm in the entire Psalter. And so it serves in a lot of ways as an entryway or as a sort of a thematic introduction. And that's important because the way the psalm starts off is by telling us it's going to reveal to us what does true happiness look like. If we really want a life that is fulfilling and meaningful and happy and blessed, how do we get that? How do we experience that? And it starts off then by telling us a series. Actually, it's kind of interesting because it does it starts off by saying, "Blessed is the man who walks," and then it actually then moves into a series of negatives. And that's kind of a poetic trick, you might say, or not a trick, but a poetic use of language. So let's look at that for a moment because I maybe we'll even highlight those words here, not this, nor that. And then it's kind of concluded by the word but. And so what you see here is it starts off with the positive and then so in other words, this phrase here and this phrase here kind of go together. And then these three phrases in the middle go together. And so it's the person who walks and whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night, rather than the person who walks in the counsel of the wicked, stands in the way of sinners, or sits in the seat of scoffers. Now, what's I think important here is just to recognize something, and I just want to show you what this is. This is I'll use a different color for it. This is in Hebrew poetry, when you're reading the Psalms, for example, and other forms of Hebrew poetry, you're always looking for something called parallelism. And I don't even know how to spell it. I always forget if there's one L or two and where. But anyways, parallelism is just this idea where the text will give you one line, and then it'll usually give you a second line like this, and the second line somehow builds upon the first. Now it can build upon it, it might be a statement and then a negative, like and that would be like, one statement followed by the opposite. So, and that's kind of what we see here. Blessed is the man who walks not in this, not in this, not in this, but in this. So there's a little bit of antithetical parallelism is what it's called. There's also other kinds of parallelism where you might get a positive statement like this. Um, you get a positive statement and then a second positive statement that builds upon the first. And so it takes an idea and then it says more about it, kind of develops it out. And then sometimes you'll even have a third line. And so it's kind of this escalating thing. And that kind of helps take an idea and develop it in very poetic language. So I draw your attention to that just so that you can kind of be aware of it, because that's really what we have here. We have three ideas here. We have walking, and then standing, and then sitting. And so there's actually a progression there, right? You have a person walking is movement, and then standing is, not, and then sitting is the third thing altogether. And so there's this progression. Oops, I meant to erase that, and which it seems that the author wants us to see there. I can erase that too. Um, and that's pretty typical of Hebrew poetry. And so anytime you're reading from poetic language, it's good to just be watching for where do you see the parallelism. The other thing that you often find, and this is kind of the next thing that I want to draw your attention to, and I'm going to do it by way of a highlighter, is metaphors and word pictures. So, and we find, metaphor and a simile is similar. Those two things are very similar. A metaphor is a comparison between two ideas, and it does not have the word like or as, so it tends to be a little more vivid. A simile has the word like in there. So, like, you might say that the sun is like a flashlight shining down on us or something. That's kind of a lame simile, but you get the idea. He is, but I bring it up because here's what we have here. He is like, right? So that tells you that it's a simile here. And the question is, well, who is like? And we already know the answer. It's the man who walks, and now he's finishing that thought. So happy or blessed is the man who walks not like this. This is the way of wickedness, but rather like this. And I'm going to say more about this in just a second. And then it gets us into the metaphor. He is like a tree planted, yielding its fruit, does not wither. And then you actually get a second metaphor a little bit later on, right down here. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff. So we got a contrast here. Now we're beginning to see what the text is really pointing us to, because you have a contrast. You have on the one hand, we have the righteous, the man who walks, and we know that already is righteous. And he's like a tree that prospers. And then the wicked, which we've kind of highlighted. Maybe I'll use a yellow pen here to keep that consistent. The wicked over here are like the chaff. So we have two ideas that are beginning to emerge. We have the righteous and we have the wicked. Now, we're going to go through the end of the text, and I'm kind of looking big picture here. We end, you know, here's more about the wicked. Maybe I should have just included this because this is really all one big idea. The wicked are like chaff, they won't stand in judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. So we're getting this contrast between the righteous and the wicked, and then so we have a closing phrase there at the end. So, but the point is that the text is contrasting this. Now we can go through and start to take note of all the things that the text says about the wicked. We can actually just highlight the counsel of the wicked. Um, the wicked are not so, the wicked will not stand in judgment, the way the wicked will perish. So we begin to see what the writer is talking about in terms of the wicked. Now, then the question becomes, well, what is the difference? What really separates the wicked from the righteous? Well, let's do this just to make it a little bit easier on ourselves. Let's go through and let's highlight where we see about the righteous. So the man who walks hasn't called him righteous yet, but he says, oops, there we go. Um, there's the idea of righteous there. The congregation of the righteous over here. So we have that, and then we know a little bit more about the about the difference. Let me see here. Got to get my highlighter. We need a slightly different color. So the word law is one that comes up quite a few times, or at least a couple times, maybe not quite a few, comes up twice at least. And that's one of the things that separates, because that's in the beginning here. We see that's how the author says the blessed man is the one who walks not like this, but, and that word is kind of hidden in there. Maybe I can kind of erase it and just make it a little bit more evident there. There we go. But so the blessed man is here. He's the one who delights in the law of the Lord and meditates on it day and night. So this is the happy man, or the blessed man is right here. The heart of the text is found here in terms of the difference between righteous and wicked. And what that tells us is that we kind of begin to tie these ideas together. We know that happiness, the one who really is looking for the happy and blessed life, is the one who meditates on God's law. We know that that person then leads to a life that is like a flourishing and abundant tree, and rather than like chaff. And we know that the Lord knows the way of the righteous. So we begin to get the picture here. The psalmist is really saying righteous people are like a tree rooted in water that produces fruit. And the comparison is that a righteous person is one who's rooted in the law of God, who's meditating on the law of God. In contrast, the wicked are like chaff, and the wicked, they don't have root, right? Chaff is just kind of like, stuff that blows away in the wind. It's not deeply rooted. It doesn't produce fruit. It doesn't, the wind drives it away as in comparison to yielding fruit and not withering. So there's a pretty big difference there between righteous and wicked. So how do you have a life? Here's I think maybe a good summary. How do you have the sort of life that is deeply rooted so that it won't, when the hardships and the vicissitudes of life come your way, you're not going to be blown away by it. It's not going to destroy you. It's not going to crush you. How can you have a life that is ultimately satisfying and fulfilling? And the answer is to be rooted in the law and the word of God. Now, we have a lot more to say about that. We're still not done the message of the text, but so far what we've done is we've done a really good deep dive into the text that's right in front of us. Now, we have to tie this into the whole narrative of Scripture still. We haven't really done anything along those lines. We still have to take it through and connect this to the overall theme of the gospel. But we've made good progress. We've done a good study of this text, and we're ready to take it to the next step. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.